Hello, and welcome to today's presentation brought to you by the Life Sciences team at ReedTech. This meeting is being recorded and all audience members are muted. We do encourage questions, so please submit them at any time using the chat box. We will cover as many as possible during the Q&A at the end. If you're having problems hearing audio through your computer, try calling the phone number listed in the email invite or on the screen by clicking on the phone icon. The slides and video link will be sent to all registrants after this live presentation. I'm Sam Page, Marketing Manager for Medical Devices here at ReedTech, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I believe we have a few poll questions to go through while we wait for our audience to file in. We would love to learn a little more about you in advance so that we can ensure our presentation is on point. So I'm going to go ahead and start launching these poll questions. So our first question is, in what locations do you market your products? So please choose all that apply. We've got the EU, the US, China, South Korea, and Australia for options. So I'll leave this open to collect responses for a few moments. Okay, go ahead and close it. Lots of EU. And I can share. So we can all see the results. Looks like 100% of you are selling into the EU, which makes a ton of sense. You're at the right webinar. We've also got 93% in the US. We've got 43% China, 45% in South Korea, and 68%, wow, in Australia. Very cool. So my next question is, how many products do you have that require UDI compliance? If you would just select one of these groups that applies to you. Give you about 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close it and share. Yeah, and it looks like we've got a lot of, with 1 to 50, several that are in that 50 to 500 range. Yeah, lots right in the middle, and then just a few of us are between 5,000 and 200K plus. So very cool. Thank you for sharing. And then we have one more poll. And this one is just a question about the size of your company. So if you could just select one of these to let us know. Okay, about 10 more seconds and then I'll share. And it looks like most of you are falling right there in the middle, with about 25% of us having 1,000 plus employees and less than 7% have less than 10. So kind of a nice spread here. All right, now that we've got the polls in, I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So thank you so much again for your participation in those polls. It's really helpful. In today's webinar, we're going to be asking the experts about developments in the European Union regarding the recent amendments to requirements for legacy devices. I want to thank you all for the enormous amount of questions we've received in advance of this webinar. So due to the sheer number, we won't be able to respond to all of them here today, but hopefully most of them are covered in today's talk. Specific questions that we aren't able to address will be responded to directly by members of our staff in a timely fashion. So, and please feel free to continue to submit your questions through the chat throughout the presentation. We'd love to hear them. We're so pleased to introduce our panelists for today's talk. First up, we have Gary Sainer. He's a subject matter expert on medical device, unique device identification, and other structured content, reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He has over 30 years of experience in software development, process management, and data administration, with the last 15 years focused on the life sciences industry. He serves as co-chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the medical devices group. Next up, we have Ronald Boumans. Formerly a senior inspector at the Dutch Competent Authority for Medical Devices, the IGJ, and a senior regulatory consultant at Emergo. He now owns his own consulting company, Boumans Regulatory Consulting, and serves as founder of the PRRC Academy. With these introductions made, I will now turn control over to Gary. Gary, can you get us started?
Well, thank you very much, Sam. We have a pretty full agenda. I was highly impressed with all the questions that came in, a lot of good interest about legacy devices on the European front. So we'll try to work our way through those. For today, I'll try to act as the interviewer, and Ronald will be our subject matter expert on the topic. We're very fortunate to have Ronald with us today. He's been connected to the regulatory space and medical device regulation and IVDRs over the years and continues to do so. So he's a great resource, and we're so glad to have Ronald with us today. So what I'll be doing is working my way through some of these topics. We'll take a quick look at the background, why the amendment was considered and implemented. And then there's a number of timing and milestones connected to that amendment. We'll touch on those, and then move over to the regulatory strategy and consequences. So there are some very important milestones and events that you want to tick off to maintain your legacy status, not only initially meet it, but also maintain it. And there are consequences if you don't. So at the end, there's a couple questions that we have received regarding UDIMED and the impact to the UDI reporting into the UDIMED module. So we'll touch on those. Would love to have enough time left over to field some of those live questions that come in. So feel free to go ahead and send them in. All right, with that, let's talk a little bit about the background. Obviously, we were not going to go through everything about the MDR, way too broad topic for this particular hour, but the medical device regulation rolled out in 2017 with that date of application in 2020. And then just prior to that date of application, there was a legislation that moved the date of application out 1 year to be now 2021. So there's been some sifting sands regarding this medical device activity and the legacy provisions that are embedded into that regulations. So initially there was this 4-year period where you were able to continue to place products on the market with some criteria. Ronald has all those details, and I'm anxious to go through those questions and bring them in. So let's start with the very first one. If we take a look at this particular regulation that was just passed roughly 2 months ago, Regulation 2023-607, that amended the MDR. So very often, Ronald, we get this question, why was this particular amendment necessary? And I know that you prepared some answers here, so I'll pull those up as your talking points. So do you want to try to address this particular first question?
Yeah, thank you, Gary and Sam. Yes, well, as you can see, the MDR had a flaw in its structure when it was designed. What they wanted to do was when they had this transitional period was to allow companies to recertify from MDD to MDR or AIMDD, the Medical Device Directive or Active Implantable Medical Device Directive, to the Medical Device Regulation, following the normal recertification cycle. Now, that there were some assumptions to justify that. The first was that all notified bodies would have to be designated between May 2017, when the MDR became in power, right? And roughly in November 2019. And that would allow companies to just follow that normal cycle. But the problem was that by November 2019, if you remember, 0 notified bodies were designated. That happened only in January 2020, which was BSI UK, which left soon after because of Brexit. It's another thing. All the implementing rules, all the institutional arrangements like UDAMED, expert panels, reference labs, all those things had to be ready, and they're not. As we speak, at this moment, the implementing rules for Annex 15 devices without a medical purpose, they are under the final round of comments by the stakeholders. So it's not ready. They were not ready in time. So yeah, they also want to fit a 5-year certification cycle in 4 years. And that is also a challenge. I mean, if everything had been ready, yeah, you might have pulled it off, but they might have pulled it off, but no, with that together. So what happens is that Regulation 2023-607, that gives more time to notified bodies. That is why we have this regulation. It's not for the manufacturers, it's for notified bodies, basically. And I think that's very important to understand that.
Yeah, that timeline and that plan appeared to be subject to a lot of change. There was slow response and designation and so on. So that was certainly enough to justify this particular amendment. But then there was other questions. I think there's in the audience had perhaps some additional reasons that might have caused the regulation to be considered and put forward. I think you collected a couple more here as well, Ronald.
Yeah, of course, Brexit. Although it was announced in 2016, which was before the launch of the MDR, it was just too late to and too unclear to take into consideration. So what you see is that Brexit reduced the number of notified bodies, and a very big one, BSI, they were kicked out. Oh yes, they managed to move to the Netherlands, but it took a lot of time and energy and attention from everybody involved. There's a lot of double work going on now, so it didn't help for sure. Then COVID-19, for 2 years, it was for more than 2 years, it was not possible to do on-site audits, and they are absolutely necessary for MDR certification. So that's a problem. It also meant that the notified bodies could not be audited. So the joint assessment audits also were delayed. So that further delayed the designation of notified bodies. Then there was a problem with Switzerland. They have the institutional framework agreement between Switzerland and the European Union that settles the mutual recognition agreements between Switzerland and the European Union for specific regulations. There was a new framework proposed to replace the old one. Old plan is no longer available, so the new one is not there, so they cannot sign a new mutual recognition agreement. So Switzerland could not sign the mutual recognition agreement for the MDR and the IVDR. So Switzerland is out of the EU, out of the single market for medical devices. And again, another notified body was lost, and again, it's demanded a lot of time for everybody involved in regulatory affairs. Now, and then we had the war in Ukraine. This was brought up as one of the reasons, as a justification for the delay by the European Commission. I don't know the exact relation between that, but at least it didn't help. If that war had not been there, a lot of things would have been slightly easier. So, yeah, the timelines were already ambitious, but the timelines did not take into account there's something like the outside real world, and so therefore the notified bodies don't have didn't have a chance to certify everybody involved. So,
yeah, and all these particular reasons just piled up, and I think you collected some results from the European Commission survey that they performed to try to put some numbers around that. Let's take a look at those. This first one is interesting. Can you explain what we see here on the screen?
Yeah, what you see is the short, the lower line. Those are the certificates under the MDR that have been issued, and the upper line are applications for certificates. It's cumulative. It's not what happened during that period. It's just a cumulative result. So far, well, until just over half a year ago, almost 2,000 certificates were issued, and 8,000, just over 8,000 certificates were in process. Now, to put that into a perspective, it is estimated that we should be looking at 18,000 certificates in the whole. And that means that there are another 10,000 applications to go. And if we talk about timelines, then this number of 10,000 suddenly becomes quite a challenging thing. So let's look at the next slide.
Yeah, I think before we go there, a quick comment is this is not a good trend. It shows that the backlog is going up quite significantly, and as more of those certificate expires, I would think this is going to grow quite rapidly. But that really is a concern, and I'm sure that was very powerful evidence to the commission. This next slide is the one about the actual time to do an evaluation and assessment.
Yeah, so this is the time that notified bodies need to do their assessment. So if you look at a full quality management system and products, it's over a year, sometimes even 2 years. So that's a lot. Less than 6 months, it's very rare, and only for quality management systems. And that's often for companies that already had a quality management system certified by that same notified body. So the quality management step is relatively low. If you go back to if you just take the other slide, can you go back to the other slide? What you see is that in the devices, the applications from February 2021, not all of them, well, maybe all of them have been processed by October 2022. So that's what you see here, right? You see that line go up. So there's this 2.5 year gap between application and certification. You can see that here. So I'm not really worried about a backlog building up. That's just something else going on, and that's the whole. What you see here is a pipeline of work for notified bodies, and so maybe there's a backlog of work, but don't worry. This new regulation, the 2023-607, gives some air for notified bodies, gives some room for this to be resolved.
Yeah. So I guess that compounds from a number of different sources. One is the regulations are just being rolled out, and the guidance documents, and then getting notified bodies not only designated but staffed and up to the capability of performing an audit. So this is brand new to them as well. So there's a bunch of things going against the notified bodies there. Before we leave this question, let's take a look at the timeline, just to graphically look at what actually happened. The date of application is this first red line, and then directive products that are medical devices that are under the directive that are continually placed on the market after that period of time, still meeting the criteria, would have that timeline out to 2024. And then there was in the medical device regulation a sell-off period of 1 year where the supply chain could be cleared out. But after the amendment, you'll see this line extended quite a bit further. So there's a lot of extra time here, Ronald, for the legacy devices to stay on the market and not allow a gap to be coming in place where patients and hospitals and so on do not have products. So I think this is the intent, is to continue to deliver products and allow times for the notified bodies to work off those requests for applications. There's two different timelines here. I don't know if you were able to pick that up, but the Class 3 and 2B implantables go out to the end of 2027, and the Class 2A and Bs in those one sterile, measuring, and reusable surgical have another year. So that's quite an extension, and I know a number of manufacturers are going to be exercising that additional period of time. So let's move over to some of the other timing and milestones. So if you were hoping to claim that extension, a couple questions came in about how you must comply with that. And let's go to this first one, Ronald, about what actions are required of a legacy device manufacturer to claim those particular extensions that we just talked about.
Yeah, well, what you just showed this extended timeline, yes, it is there. We have more time, but it's mainly for the notified bodies. So for companies, be aware that from 26 May 2024, the short summary is you have to comply with the regulations, or else. And I'll show you what happens. I'll talk you through that over the coming slides. So on 26 May 2024, that's your deadline for lodging a notified body application. Remember, we have 10,000 to go. That's about 800 per month, right? Okay, from now on. Those are staggering numbers. You're not buying, you're not ordering pizza there. It's really something. So 10,000 to go. Be aware of that. On 26 May 2024, you must have a signed agreement with a notified body for certification, and that same notified body must do your surveillance. Very often it's the same notified body you have now, but for some companies, they have to switch, or they want to switch to another notified body, and then you need to have to switch your surveillance to that notified body as well. And then indeed, your MDD, AI MDD certificates will expire on 31st December 2027, 2028. Now, when should you have your notified body application agreed with a notified body? I think it's the end of this year. That's not written anywhere except here, but this is the practical thing. After that date, remember 10,000 certificates to go. When will be the most companies waking up to get them? Probably somewhere in the first half of next year. If you miss that date, if you miss these dates, if you're too late, your device will no longer be considered a legacy device, and it cannot be placed on the market. You're out, right? So it's very important that you understand that you must comply in a year's time in full with the MDR. You can only then you can certify, you can go to a notified body, and basically you need to be ready by the end of this year. So yeah, you have roughly half a year to go to get this done. That's basically what I'm saying here.
Yeah, that's a very critical timelines. Rutgers, thinking about this, I should have put those in really big letters and in red, because you don't want to miss those. I did take some of these dates, Ronald, and put them on a timeline. Let's take a quick look at that. At least in my mind, sometimes it helps to see it graphically laid out. We saw these this timeline before in the two events that you just discussed, the triangle being May of next year, to have that, first of all, the QMS installed and a request out to your notified body And then the second milestone is that square red item where you have to have the signed contract in place with your notified body for negative MDR assessment to be in place. Now, the other thing that we haven't talked about is this mandatory registration period. So legacy devices are subject to reporting into UTMED, and assuming UTMED is continued on the target, there's this 18-month window where those devices would need to be registered. Now, one thing we haven't talked about is the timing of the devices that move over to MDR compliance. So there's a brick wall over here. This is end of life. You cannot continually market legacy devices and place them on the market. Eventually they come into an end. So the end of life situation. So at some point in time, you'll need to migrate those into an MDR equivalent device, which is the same device, but now it actually meets MDR compliance and assessment. Or you can migrate into an MDR substitute device, which essentially is a new model and version, but it replaces the legacy device. And ideally, the timing of that migration, either to equivalent or substitute, is early on. But we're seeing that this is not happening. Only a couple thousand have actually started and completed. So this is roughly a year in duration. And most likely the scenario is that this plan slides, and hopefully it doesn't slide any more than what is shown on the screen here, because now you're up against the end of life of your legacy device, and you're just now getting your certificate completed. So somewhere in between there, hopefully you'll be able to contract your notified body and have them schedule and actually conduct the assessment and have you receive the certificate. So I find that sometimes it's a little bit easier to see this graphically. Let's move on over to some of the strategy and concepts that these questions have come in, and we kind of grouped a couple questions surrounding the strategy and the consequences of complying with the legacy. So this is a good question, Ronald. What would be the single takeaway you would like the audience to walk away from this particular webinar with?
But I like I'm aware that many of the people here in the audience are regulatory staff, and they have to discuss their plans and what they want to do with management. And management, they like to have a short message, something simple they can immediately understand. And something went wrong in the PR from this for this regulation. It was called the delay regulation, and they liked that word. So we need to correct that now. So what I want you to take home here and explain to your management is that the concept of legacy devices will change from May 2024, and to such an extent that companies must act now to keep their legacy status. So if you want to keep your legacy status, you must act now, because it will change in about a year's time. And then once you lost it, you can never get it back.
Yeah, so that's
key takeaway.
Really important. Yeah. So that actually begs a follow-on question. How does the definition of the legacy device change? Are there some criteria that is now different than what we had in the original MDR?
Yep. So if you look at the MDR, you must have a valid MDD or AR MDD certificate.
Yep.
So it must be valid to 26 May 2024 or earlier. So, but at least it must be valid. There's no significant change allowed in the device, a significant change in the design or the intended purpose. It must remain compliant to MDD or AIMDD. And there are some MDR requirements that must be followed regarding post-market surveillance, vigilance, registrations. That's the short summary of the MDR version of a legacy device. Be aware, the term legacy device is not legally defined. This is a concept used to explain a certain status of a device. So that's the old legacy device. The new legacy device, that's that requires an operational quality management system according to the MDR from May next year. You must have an application for that, for certification for that particular device from May 2024, and an agreement with the notified body for certification and surveillance by September 2024. And then there's a not explicit requirement, but it will actually work like that. The notified body did not refuse the certification. So you have your application, the notified body starts its work, and they come to the conclusion, well, sorry, it's not good. We refuse certification. Then you're out. Then you have to start all over again, join the end of the line. That's the notified body. See that you have to find a notified body that you can launch an application, and all that time you will not be considered legacy devices. You will not have access to the notified body. So having found a notified body and having all that ready, you're not in the safe. You really need to make sure that you have good technical documentation and PMS plans, PMS procedures, the whole lot. Because if your certificate is refused, you really have a problem.
Yeah. Does that happen sometimes, Ronald, where a notified body will either initially or once they get into it a little bit, suddenly realize that it's not a good fit, and then they refuse to go forward? So it might be that they're not designated for that particular type of product, or maybe the technical documentation is not of sufficient quality. Do you think that happens in the past, even with a directive?
Yeah, we've seen that, and we see more now happening under the MDR. At the moment of your application, the notified body will review your product status. Is it a medical device? Risk classification. So you have classified in a particular way, and they will look into that. That is, what is it, Annex 7, Section 4.3, I think, from the top of my head. So they will assess that, and they will use that to accept your application. So for that application, you need to have that. And it also happens that companies have deficiencies in the tech file, and yeah, you get 2 rounds to correct that, and if you don't correct that, you're out.
That's serious.
So yeah, so you have to be very careful there. Make sure that you follow Annex 2, Annex 3. They set out how your tech file should be structured. Just follow that and really go into details. For every part, explain what you want to, what you're talking about, then talk about it, and then summarize what you have been talking about. So this is the clinic, for example, this is the biocompatibility evaluation. You discuss that, and then you say, this was the biocompatibility evaluation. So that the notified body reviewer really understands what they're looking at. Don't make them into someone who needs to search. If you have to go back and just say, no, it's in there. Look, there. No, there. That's a waste of time, and you have had your opportunity. So make sure you have rock solid technical documentation.
Yeah, that seems to be extremely one of the high lists. You have to check that off. Make sure you have a good notified body, qualified and able to work through it. Now, we had another question here, Ronald. I think we touched on this, but it probably needs emphasis and maybe reiteration. Does this mean that if I'm a manufacturer, I can wait until 2027 to 2028, those deadlines, before I can become certified? And I don't think that's a good plan, but let's hear your answer.
Don't. Just make sure you're ready in May next year. Just make sure you're ready by then. I mean, from 2017 until 2024, that's 7 years. So you had quite some time there. But notified bodies get more time because they had this design flaw put into them and then some external factors thrown at them that delayed the whole process. So yeah, it's for notified bodies, not for manufacturers. If you haven't managed to do this in 7 years' time, yeah, it will be difficult to justify further delays, really. There are some ways out, but don't count on them. That's not your plan A, not your plan B.
Yep. So the next question had to do with moving forward with the legacy device, but what happens if my certificate had already expired? So the question reads, can we also use this extension of the legacy status if our certificate already expired? And that's getting down into some special scenarios.
Yeah, you can do that. If your certificate was valid on May 2021, so the date of application of the MDR, that's a condition. It expired before 20 March 2023. That's the date of application of Regulation 2023-607. So if your certificate expired in that gap, that window, and the device meets the other requirements for legacy devices, so it still complies with the directives. It's you comply with the PMS registration and reporting things. Well, those legacy device requirements, and a notified body has already accepted an application for MDR certification. But as we've seen, sometimes it takes up to 2 years. So yeah, there can be a gap there. Then you can apply this for the legacy status from this new regulation, or the notified bodies have given you some kind of derogation, Article 59, Article 97. Now, those derogations, I'm not going into detail of those, but these are two articles that allow competent authorities to allow devices on the market without a valid CE certificate. It's a very complex thing to do. Again, this should not be your plan A or plan B. They can do that under the condition that you either are in a process with a notified body, or you have a good reason why you're not there, and it is expected that a notified body will soon start working on it. Otherwise, you make no chance. Yep. And yeah, so Article 5997, they are really, that's plan D, E, F, maybe even further down the line, but this is not your plan A or B.
All right, very good. So that does provide a pathway there. Now, let's move on to the other question about another scenario. We have a legacy device that we want to replace with a new device. So I'm assuming that would be a MDR compliant device. How can we prevent a gap in supply between May 2024 and the date the new device becomes certified? So this is, again, another special situation. I think you have some information here about a substitute device.
Yeah, it's called substitute device. So you have a device that's you want to replace by a new device, but it's going to take the same position in terms of use and more or less the same intended purpose, but it has, for example, an update in technology. So it's a substitute device. Now, the exact definition of substitute device, we're still waiting on guidance, and how it's going to be determined, again, we're waiting for guidance, but let's for now assume that we all agree what it means. So you have the substitute device. You can treat that device that will be substituted as a legacy device and use it on the same terms as for normal legacy devices. So you want to replace the device by a new one, you can keep it on the market under the old certificate, under the MDD certificate, as long as it fits all the definitions of a legacy device. And it also means that your new device must be in process with a notified body. So if the new device is not ready for certification, tough luck.
Yeah, it could be a gap there in your strategy to make sure that You're like,
Well,
all your
if you look at,
documentation
sorry,
has
but
to
if
be
you
in
look at
place
your
versus
original
substituted.
timelines, if you
Yeah,
look at your original timelines, that would not have been a good strategy,
yeah.
right? So,
Okay. All right. What is your advice if we want to keep our legacy status? So what are the check boxes that would be good for a manufacturer to adhere to?
well, yeah, there's a lot you need to do. Make sure you're ready for MDR certification. So your technical documentation, quality management system, the whole lot, your PMS plans, PMCF plan, it must be there. You must be ready for it. And try to sign an agreement with a notified body for certification and for surveillance. So that's something that you should be working on immediately. Now, if you start approaching a notified body, as I already explained, they will look for the scope of their intended work. So they need the justification for the status of medical device, the risk class, and you must have your basic UDI device family structure ready. That's important because the basic UDI defines your device families, and each device family should have one tag file, and each tag file one basic UDI. That's not a rule from the law, but it's a practical rule. In practice, I see that works best. One-on-one basic UDI tag files. There are some situations where you can that lead to exceptions, and that's fine because it's not a legal requirement. But in general, practically always it's a one-on-one relation. So your basic UDI device family structure must be in order before you go to the notified body. And of course, your quality management system must be there, must be up and running.
Yep. So I see the time. I'm going to perhaps move this conversation over to the last topic that we wanted to touch on. There were some questions about whether or not this amendment had any impact to the UDAMED preparation and the implementation, as well as the reporting period for UDI. So let's take a look at this first question. And it really has to do with the UDAMED. So how does the legacy device amendment change the UDAMED implementation timeline?
Well, yeah, regarding UDAMED, when I still worked for the Dutch competent authority, I represented Netherlands in the UDI, the UDAMED working group at the European Commission, and that work started back in 2006. So I'm with UDAMED, and from 2013 on, I represented the European Association of Authorized Representatives in the same UDAMED working group on behalf of Emergo, the company I worked for. So I've been involved in UDAMED for quite some time. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it finally being rolled out and being effective. So this is a very personal thing here, UDAMED. What I've seen is that there are no changes in the timing plans for UDAMED. And UDAMED basically is already too late. So this delay, this extension regulation does not affect UDAMED at all. So that means that the current plan is to have UDAMED ready for publication in the official journal for the European Union in around May next year, so Q2 next year. Then UDAMED applies 6 months later and is fully mandatory 18 months later. So 3 years from now, that's May 2026, then UDAMED should be fully ready. And that means that all devices must be in there, even if they are legacy devices, regardless what status legacy devices. But even if they are legacy devices, they must be in there. Now, there's a point with the second half of this period, the last 18 months, all new data must be entered into UDAMED. And new data, for example, if you have an incident report, you must enter the incident report into UDAMED. And that means the company must be in there. If it's a non-EU company, their authorized representative must be in there. The certificates must be in UDAMED. The device must be in UDAMED, and then you can file a report. Now, if you have one of those high-profile cases, you have just a few hours to enter all the data, and that's going to be a mammoth task to do that. So my suggestion is start entering data into UNIMED now, then you can learn, then you can build routines. So by the time you actually using UNIMED, you know what it is and you have your procedures and everything. It is there, it's routine within your organization. So
Yeah,
that's my tip.
Yeah, we work with a number of clients that are struggling with collecting data, putting data into the playground, and so on, and starting to make voluntary submissions. But this becomes certainly much more important when we finally get to the opening of the mandatory period. I took some of those timelines and put it on a graph just to graphically represent this. I won't spend a whole lot of time on that, so it's kind of a slide for homework. But there are 6 modules in UNIMED. So the actor module is open with voluntary submissions, as well as the UDI device and the certificate notified body. Those 2 modules are open for voluntary submissions, and you can make real honest to goodness submissions into the production environment. The remaining 3 are under development. A lot of activity between now and when the audit occurs. So there is an expected audit plan for the beginning of 2024, lasting roughly 6 months, and then what you had mentioned there, Ronald, about the notice UNIMED being fully functional in the official journal of the European Union, and then in the regulation there's a 6-month delay. So that particular event does trigger a lot of activity that is embedded in the MDR. So the modules then go into this mandatory period. The device and certificate modules have this 18-month transition, but you might have to act upon it very quickly, as you mentioned, on a serious incident. So then it moves into full operating mode with ongoing mandatory. So I'll leave this graph with you. If you want to come back, take a look at it, download the materials. We're going to move on to the next question here. How does the legacy medical device amendment change the timeline for device registration, the labels, and for those products that need to be directly marked?
Well, if you look at UDI device registration, UDI labels, those things, UDI only applies for MDR devices. So if your device is not is not MDR certified yet, it doesn't apply. But at the moment it becomes certified, then these requirements will apply. Of course, there are some timelines in when it should be applied. So class 2A can be later than class 3. Class 3 devices under the MDR already have to be UDI, have to have UDI on the labels. And UDI direct marking can be done a bit later, but it doesn't affect that. But if your device is not yet MDR certified, there's no need for UDI on the labels and on the devices.
Mm-hmm.
I think that legacy devices will have to be registered in UNIMED because of the extended time for the legacy devices, and UNIMED is probably going to be on time. So that's one thing. The other thing regarding UDI, I see hospitals in Europe more and more requesting UDI on labels for their tenders. So I think regardless the regulatory requirements, I think there's a market requirement to add UDI on labels.
Yep. Again, there's a timeline here for your homework. We do have this voluntary registration period charted and the mandatory 18-month period started. And for those legacy devices, you see the long window. But if you do roll out a MDR compliant device, then you do have some other requirements. So your class 1 should have been self-certified way back at the date of application. This should be old history for you if you have a class 1 self-certified. And then the top 2 rows discuss or lay out the timeline for UDI being placed on the label. So as Ronald had mentioned, there's a schedule based on the class, and then 2 years later, there's a requirement for those subset of medical devices that have to have UDI directly on the product. So we'll leave that for homework. Another question here. What is so important, or why is it so important to organize the basic UDI strategy? And I think you touched on this earlier. Maybe you can summarize this particular topic. This would be our last question, and maybe we can go over to some live questions.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, you need to have a good basic UDI structure to structure your the sets of technical documentation. I find companies can struggle. I get a lot of questions about these basic UDI structure. Companies can struggle in situations where, for example, products are distributed together. So devices that are intended to be used together, accessories, system or procedure packs. And you can just imagine if you have an active device and there's software as a medical device installed in it. What are you going to do? Are you going to treat it as one device, 2 different devices that are intended to be used together? Is one an accessory to another? Is it the system? Well, actually, all of the above can apply. It depends. And you really have to design and set up the whole structure very cleverly so that you can have the best of all worlds in terms of how you manage the tech files, basic UDI, and the whole lot. So you can do a lot there, but yeah, you need to have a good understanding of your UDI structure, your basic UDI structure.
Yeah.
So that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, well, I think if we had time, we could probably dive into that quite a little bit further. Maybe we'll keep that for another event in the future, but let's put the basic UDI on the to-do list, because we get a lot of questions as well. Is it too narrow? Is it too broad? Are there some hard restrictions? What's the guidelines, good rule of thumbs, and that sort of thing? Sam, I'm going to ask if you had any questions come in. We have a few minutes left here. Would love to be able to get some of the questions that you have picked out.
Sure. Yeah. Oh boy, we've got a lot of questions, and again, we'll be reaching out to you to respond if we don't get it covered here. So just don't worry. Our first question we have live is: does the extension have any impact on the timetable for the implementation of UDI and AIDC? Maybe Gary, that's one for you.
I'm sorry, does it have any implications on?
Does it have an impact on the timetable for the implementation of UDI and AIDC?
Oh, yeah, I think we just touched on that. It does not have any implications. The amendment did not address or change any of these UDI being placed on the label. So the remember, the UDI has to be presented in both a text form so that people can read it, the human readable portion, and also in a machine readable, so referred to as AIDC, the automatic identification and capture. So usually that's a barcode, either single dimension or 2-dimensional, but there's no impact from the amendment on these particular guidelines. So they're in place and actually in the MDR. So to make a change here, it would have to be another legislation amendment. So maybe, unless Ronald, you had something else on that, let's move to the next one.
No, I think you covered it. Yep.
All right. So next question: if a company is not moving forward with MDR, will the various competent authorities have measures in place to allow for products to be shipped into the EU to repair or replace patient devices? Ronald,
I can answer. Yeah, I can answer that. If the device needs just maintenance to keep it running, okay, you can do that. That's part of the service, part of the device. It doesn't change the device. It doesn't mean that new devices are placed on the market. But if replacement parts are separately, individually CE marked, and if they start changing the characteristics of the device, then you enter MDR territory, and that means that I think it's Article 23 on replacement parts, components and replacement parts, and then you're entering that area, and then it gets very tricky. So repairs, maintenance, yes, you can do that. At the moment you start refurbishing and changing the characteristics of the device, you quickly move into waters where you're making a new device. So manufacturing a new device.
Ronald, is that starting to touch on that making a significant change? So, if the design or intended purpose, the replacement part causes maybe the safety or effectiveness perhaps to change, and now it's significant.
Yeah, well, the significant change, that's for the design of the device. So the full design of the device, that's changed, so that has an effect in the tech file. At the moment you start adding, I should say, significantly different components to a product, to a device as part of maintenance, then yeah, you're also changing the device. But it doesn't have to necessarily have to be a change in intended purpose or the design of the device, but just the sheer factor that you change a component that is different can have that effect. And there's a lot of gray areas there. So at the moment you start doing it, sometimes you can get away with it, sometimes you can't, and that's it. Yeah, you really need to be careful if you want to do that.
Well, that when I'm faced with that, I'm going to call Ronald and have you help me out on that one. Anyway, Sam, what's the next one?
Okay, so the next question is, if our company meets the requirements for revalidation of the CE certificate, can we place the devices on the EU market?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. If our company meets the requirements for revalidation of the CE certificate, can we place the devices on the EU market?
What's exactly revalidation of CE certificate? I mean, that's if you're ready for MDR certification and you have a notified body, yeah, you can keep placing it on the market. But if you're not on the market yet, then you're struggling. So I'm not sure if I fully understand the question.
Yeah, Ronald, could you clarify? It's my understanding that notified bodies are not able to recertify to the directive. I mean, that timeline has long passed, so you cannot recertify, but you could have an evaluation to the MDR. I think there was a point, Ronald, you probably picked it up and know it better, in the FAQ on the amendment. There was this issue, question came up about how do I basically prove that my device, which now has an expired certificate, is still legitimate and considered valid. And I think the commission mentioned something about a notified body could provide some documentation or like basically a validation paper that says, yes, this product still qualifies under the the plan. So maybe that's what they were referring to. I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, notified bodies can do that. They're working on a template between them. It can be published any moment now. But basically, if you self-declare as a manufacturer, I meet the requirements from regulation 2023-607, then you basically can keep placing devices on the market. So it is a bit weird. If you have a notified body certified device, class 3, not really low risk device, and you can self-declare the device onto the market by saying, oh yeah, no, this is a legacy device. I'm a bit surprised they are moving down that line, but it appears so. I think this will there will be some edits to that part of the Q&As to make sure that it's not as easy as it sounds now.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, since no reassessment is done against the directive, it's just a matter of a goodwill and honest. Sam, do we have time for one more or a couple more?
I think we have time for one more. I'll do. Hopefully, this one is a quick one. This question came in: will the substitute device have the same basic UDI/DI as the legacy device?
If you start substituting, it's probably because it's a different device. You probably have to have a different basic UDI. Well, if it's an MDD device, it doesn't have a basic UDI. The basic UDI is an MDR thing. So MDD, AI-MDD devices do not have a basic UDI. They may have UDI on the label, that's fine, but they don't have the basic UDI. The basic UDI is really an MDR thing to identify a data set in UDAMED and to identify within the technical documentation structure of a company, all the documentation that has a relevance to a particular device or a device family as it's mentioned in UDAMED. Just imagine how that works at a competent authority. You know there's a problem with the device, so you go to a company, am I looking at the right stuff? So they need to use that information. There has been an issue, there's an incident report, and you want to dive into and then you want to dive into that. You can unambiguously identify this is a device that has been reported on, and that helps a lot for competent authorities to in their efficiency. I mean, I've been there, done it, been on a searching hunt in all sorts of technical files, and in those days they were not on PDF. Yeah, I really see this is going to help competent authorities to identify problems very clearly and unambiguously.
All right, well that's great. Sam, I think there was a couple contact slides that you wanted to talk about, and then maybe I guess we'll have to wrap it up, but this has been very good. Thank you so much, Ronald, for participating.
Yes, thank you. And we've had so many questions come in. I am delighted by the response and the engagement that we've had. So we look forward to going through these and helping you with your questions. If you have more questions for Read Tech, please contact us here. All these slides are going to go out, so you're going to have all this information. So don't worry about writing anything down or doing a screen grab. But here's the Read Tech information, and then here's for Boumans regulatory consulting. Here's the contact information for Ronald. So please do reach out. We're here to help. This stuff is complicated, so we're happy to help you with your needs. And thank you again for the engagement. Thank you, Ronald. Thank you, Gary, for a very valuable session.
Glad to help. Right. Take care now.
Yeah, thank you. And just reach out if you have a question.
Yes, please.